Hey everybody, I'm not going to take up too much of your time in tonight's intro. We have 6 stories, a few of them involving the wilderness and the darkness it can contain, a potential curse, premonitions, and small town horror. You know, the usual. I hope you guys enjoy them. A huge thank you to the incredible authors who allowed this video to be possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Likes and comments are always appreciated, but only if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is of course as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I've always loved the mountains. Something about being high up among the trees, breathing fresh, clean air has always appealed to me, and I can never resist the call of the peaks for long. I love climbing, and when I was 12, I started free climbing. I took lessons and went out in groups. Then I started climbing solo more often when I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My parents hated it when I went off on my own, but I was confident and a good climber. I'd heard all kinds of stories of bad things happening to solo climbers, of course. Falls, strange happenings, unexplained disappearances. None of it fazed me, and for 15 years, nothing happened. I had a few minor falls and few near misses, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing until what seems like 3 weeks ago. I work as a nurse, and I had my first week off in months. I hadn't been out in months, and I was restless, aching to be back in the mountains for even a day. So, as soon as my leave was cleared, I packed my bags and planned a 3-day climbing expedition in a place I read about online. Atlas Hills. Supposedly it was 900 acres of fantastic free climbing cliffs, and mountains with campgrounds spread regularly throughout for the comfort of campers. When I drove up, I realized it was so much more. Thousands of hiking trails, rivers, climbing courses, an untamed wilderness with free access to anyone willing to pay the $20 a day fee. I pulled in through the gates and up to the communal campground, where I had booked a spot to park my car and use as a base camp. I was so eager to be out, I didn't even spend the first night at camp, as I had planned. Just packed my climbing pack with everything I could possibly need for 3 days, and let the camp supervisor know I was leaving, and when I would be back, so if anything happened, someone could find me. I started off through the woods on a mapped trail, heading east with no destination in mind. It was my favorite way to climb, a day or so in as far as I could possibly go, and a day back before heading home. It gave me the taste of adventure I always yearned for, and gave me a chance to practice my navigational skills. As I walked, I got the sense of something behind me. I shrugged it off as usual. When one free climbs as often as I do, you get used to weird feelings and sensations. It did bug me just a little, because now I could hear something crunching leaves behind me every once in a while, in the way of someone clumsy trying to be as quiet as they could. I hit a flat stretch of trail and broke into a slow run, a little faster than a jog. There were footsteps now, fast and light, and not human or animal. I ran faster and the footsteps sped up with me. My heart was beating fast now, and I felt real fear like I never did in the woods. As the trail began to get rockier and fade out into the surrounding terrain, I stopped dead and spun around, not seeing anything. "Get the hell away from me!" I screamed into the trees. I thought I heard a sharp intake of breath, and the presence seemed to withdraw. I breathed easier and began to wonder if perhaps I had imagined it as I started walking again, climbing over several large rocks and trees that blocked the trail. Often footsteps echoed in a place like this. Maybe I was just jumpy after having been away from the woods for so long. I glanced at my watch. 5:46. What? That wasn't right. It had been 4:30 just minutes ago, when the thing had started following me. Surely my watch was off. I looked up at the sky, and to my surprise, it was correct. Sunset was only an hour off, and I realized suddenly the trail should have gone on at least 10 more miles, according to my map. I pulled it out again and checked. Somehow, I was 4 miles west of the trail I had been on, and far off from any other trail. Lost time. An eerie voice called. It was like a child's, high and sing-songy, but deeply wrong. Lost time and lost lives. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking as I dug in my pack for my hunting knife. This isn't funny. I found the knife and unsheathed it, the tip of the blade quivering slightly in my shaking hands. "Come out, I'm armed." I tried to force the shaking out of my voice, but it didn't work. I realized the presence was back, something watching me and breathing. Nothing moved, but I could feel it. "You're scaring me. Go away," I said, nearly sobbing as I forced the words out. There was a moment of hesitation that I could feel in my bones, a turning point. I held my breath, and after a moment, the presence withdrew. I lowered the knife, still shaking. "And stay away," I whimpered, in attempt at bravery. I should have gone back to camp, should have gone for help, but some part of me still thought that surely it was my imagination. I'd heard a bird and my mind had twisted it to seem like a voice. Nothing was here, only the wildlife and me. Nothing was here, and I was safe. I started walking again, keeping the knife in my hand. I didn't look at my watch, and I didn't look at the sky. I didn't want to know, I told myself. I didn't want to know. Another half hour and I had reached a smaller cliff that wouldn't take me too long to climb. A half hour at most. I'd set up camp at the top, make something to eat, and sleep in the peaceful night air. I started the climb and settled into the place quickly. It wasn't a hard or sheer climb, although my fingertips did start to get a little numb as the air cooled quickly. I was confident and moved quickly, letting myself forget everything that had happened in the joy of the climb. I was nearly 3/4 of the way up when I slipped. I was moving too quickly, not testing footholds, or following the rule of 3 limbs in contact at all times. My foot slipped out from under me as the hold crumbled and fell. My hand slipped and I was falling, desperately lashing out at the cliff to at least slow my fall. I would die if I fell all the way. I was going to die. A hand grabbed my forearm, and another the back of my shirt, and I stopped suddenly. I grabbed at the wall and clung to it. I looked up to see my rescuer, and no one was there. Empty rock, and I was nearly at the top of the cliff. My heart nearly stopped, and I clung to the rock face, feeling weak. I pulled myself to the top, another 2 or so feet, and looked back down at the ground. It took me a moment to realize it was wrong. I was far, far too high, and the terrain below was a thick forest canopy, not the slope of rocks it should have been. I pulled my pack off and clutched it to my chest. Looking at my map, I couldn't find it. Why couldn't I find it? It was nearly dark and I couldn't find my flashlight either. In fact, my pack seemed far lighter. When I dumped it out, only my sleeping bag, a few tins of food, my multi-tool, and a box of matches were left. All the rest of my equipment, emergency ropes, signaling equipment, other food, water, and my tent had vanished. Even my backpack seemed different. I could have sworn it was a lighter blue with white patches, instead of navy with black patches before I had fallen. Surely it was just the light, right? And everything else had fallen out when I lost my grip. I didn't want to think about it. I couldn't think about it. I was simply laid out, curled in a ball with my back to a boulder, and my pack in front of me, my multi-tool clutched in my hand, with the 2-inch blade extended. I didn't sleep. All around me in the darkness, that same childlike voice called out, laughing merrily. Lost time, lost lives. Lost, lost, lost. Lost time, lost lives. Lost maps, lost packs. It circled me all night, and I waited for it to end, crying silently and trying desperately not to catch a glimpse of the twisted figure skipping around me. As I closed my eyes against the sight, I heard a voice, deeper and male, say, "The lost hiker watches until the end." Sunrise couldn't be soon enough. The light faded out as the light grew, and I found that I was in a set-up camp on top of the cliff I had started up the night before, prior to the fall. I had all my stuff and my pack was the right color again. I laid outside of my tent, and there were the remains of a fire in front of me. It hadn't been a dream, and I knew it. I didn't touch anything. Not my pack, not the tent, not the water. Everything was wrong, and I wanted to go home, and never set foot outside of my bedroom ever again. With nothing but what I was wearing, not even a map, I climbed back down the cliff, a different route than I thought I had taken up. I ran all the way back to the camp from there, not stopping, scrambling back up each time I fell with no regard to the blood streaming down my legs and arms, and desperately ignoring the footsteps keeping pace with me. I burst back into camp, wild-eyed, and surely looking like I'd been in the woods for a week, not a day. I unlocked my car and climbed in, huddling in the back seat until the footsteps that had followed me stopped echoing in my skull. Then, I climbed into the front seat and drove off, intending to let the camp manager know I was leaving early. When I got to his cabin, there was a crowd held back by police tape, Not in my right mind, I climbed out and went over, desperate to leave but not wanting to leave without telling someone, lest a search party be sent out. As I took a few steps forward, the people shifted in a way that let me see what was on the ground. A body. My body. And the words, "The lost hiker returns," carved into the dirt beside me. I was falling, broken and bruised. Sharp pain and everything spiraled away. Scenes shifted before me. I could see myself climbing, falling, laying dead on the ground. Two of me dead on the ground. The twisted creature from the night before standing over my broken body at the bottom of a cliff. Blood. Me in a hospital bed. A grave with my name on it. Back, I thought. Back to the hospital. My boring job full of irritable patients, where I'm alive and tired. Back, and everything went black. I was in a hospital and doctors were standing over me. Bad fall, they said. A shame. And it was all gone again, fading into darkness. I woke up just a little several more times before finally waking up properly. "Grandma?" The voice of a little boy said, high and sweet. I opened my eyes and a small boy stood beside me, with a woman who looked like an older version of me, and a tall man behind him. "Who the hell are you people?" I demanded. My voice cracked and I needed water. "Do you need water, Mom?" The woman said. "I can get the nurse to give you something to knock you out again." "Who are you?" I said. "I'm not even married." "I'm Eve," she said. "Your daughter. Dad died 10 years ago. Remember?" "No," I said, panic rising in me. "I'm 27. I'm young. Got my nursing degree a few years ago. I work at Charlottesville Regional Hospital." But I had felt my own soft, wrinkled skin. Felt my frail bones. "How old am I?" I asked, voice shaking. 93, the woman said, confusion in her voice. "No," I said. My voice broke. "Get out. All of you get out, and don't come back." I screamed and screamed, telling them to never come back, to get away from me. The boy cried and I felt only panic. "Don't come back," I yelled as they left. The woman sobbing as she held the child. They didn't, and it has been a week. The doctors use words like tumor and terminal in 2 weeks, as in terminal brain tumor with only 2 weeks to live. My life has been stolen, and I write to warn you. Climbers, adventurers, campers, people still living like they should. If you ever see an ad for a beautiful campground called Atlas Hills, run and never look back. You won't come back who you were before, and you won't survive in any way that matters. I warn you now, in hopes that you might find this and know to stay away. The lost hiker of Atlas Hills comes for all who hike there, and he shows no mercy. He steals your years and your soul, and you will not come back. Be warned. Water hitting the basin of the bath. The clear crystal water begins to fill the pale bath. Clean, pure, fresh water, ready to cleanse all the problems, depression, nightmares away. The warmth filling your heart, keeping you safe from the cold world. Beauty is deceptive, and one must take caution when beholding its benevolence, or that beauty can lead you to your last breath. Aiko Namura, a name that you must never say, lest think about, whilst enjoying the warmth of your bath, as the curse it carries with its words are great. Her story is haunting. If you do not wish to hear her grim past, stop listening now. Aiko is a young, youthful girl, beautiful in every way. Looks, intelligence, wit. She is destined for something beyond herself. Aiko was creative, moved by tragedy, fear, despair things that inspired her. Her creativity and passion carried a huge burden. She was depressed, filled with sadness. She had lost hope, not only in the world but in herself. She would draw to release how she felt. Her drawings were beautiful. You could see her passion splash across the page. However, her art was sinister, surrounded in darkness, bleak, and like her, full of despair. Her life was surrounded in darkness, disowned by her family. Art communities would look at her art in disgust. She was lost in the world and within her head. She turns the tap. The glistening water begins to flow out of its spout. hot and cold water intertwining, creating a warm, thick steam that would fill the bathroom. It was moments like this that would fill her heart with the warmth she lost. She would step in the bath. The pure water would envelop her skin, softening it, the heat smoldering it. The heat of the bath was intense. The warmer she felt, the more it hurt, the more she would feel. As she sank into the bath of her own abyss, a vision came to her. A painting unlike no other. She gets out of the safety of her bath and began her work. The rain was battering her window as she worked, her brush massaging the canvas, the paint of her passion. She stopped, finishing up the last drops of her drawing. She puts down her brush and paint, and looks through her window. She watched the rain slapping the pavement. The same pure water that ran out of the path looked different in the darkness outside. The only light was the white of the moon. She wanted to feel the water. The difference between the water in her bath and the water outside. Grabs her coat and rushes to the rain. Outside she stood there, in the middle of the road, looking at the moon. The rain soaking her through, but the water felt amazing. It was bitter cold, but it made her feel good. She felt better bathing in her own despair. She walks home again. Feeling better, her head clearer. She walks through the door, and horror greets her. Her painting was at the corner of the room, the moonlight shining on it through a window. It was horrifying. Her face was distorted, disfigured, and her jaw was hanging from her face. A large gash from a blade ear to ear, her jaw resting on the water, blood-red water sounding her lower half. She shuts her eyes and begins to cry. She opens her eyes after some time. Cold water was smothering her skin. She felt faint, weak, and looked down at the water. Blood-red cold water. The painting she envisioned was no painting at all. In fact, the canvas she unleashed her passion onto was her own face. The cold water she felt from the rain was her own blood. She had sunk into her head's despair. The bath that kept her safe and warm was now cold and lifeless. As she began to sink into the depths of the bathwater, she began to choke. The water taking her last breaths. Aiko Namura, surrounded in her own despair, fell into the abyss of her head. The only thing that gave her warmth turned into the coldness of her soul, and inevitably created the painting that she envisioned. Her last and final piece of art. Her beauty removed, manifesting into the mess of her head. My little sister Abigail and I grew up in Cooksburg, Pennsylvania. We lived in a house just outside of town surrounded by the woods. This was 20 years ago. Abigail was only 6 and I was 10. Abby had been sleepwalking for years by then, but nothing too dramatic. Mom and Dad would find her wandering the house while they were still awake. You know, typical kid sleepwalking stuff, nothing sinister. One night, I got woken up by the sound of the porch screen closing. My bedroom lay just above the back door, so I'd always hear the squeak of the hinges from my window. It was December 21st, 1999. The winter solstice. It must have been past midnight when I woke. The lights were off, and the house utterly still. Confused, I got up and stumbled over to the window, still sleepy. I know that I saw Abby walking into the woods. I swear it was her. She wore her favorite nightie, a long pink one that dragged on the floor. She disappeared into the trees, but there was something strange about the woods. It's hard to describe. It was the same wood I always saw, and yet, it wasn't. I know I should have gone into my parents' room and woken them up. Trust me, I know. They never forgave me for it, but I was just a kid, and I was always looking out for Abby. Both our parents worked a lot, and they expected me to take care of her, so I put on my shoes and ran out after her. I just thought she was sleepwalking again. The woods. Okay. Yes, they felt wrong, but I didn't really think about it at the time. Abby loved to sing. It was her favorite thing to do. She'd always be learning something new, a nursery rhyme that Dad would teach her from his youth. She'd even sung in front of our church a few times. That night, I could hear Abby's voice, echoing through the woods. Ethereal and haunting. The song, though, I've never heard it before or since. The words, I still remember some of them. The haunting king dead or gone. He rides a storm of howls. His song is sung. Death's deed be done. Beware the hunted crown. Much of that night has been lost to me, even though I've been seeing therapists since I was 15. but that little verse still rings in my head. Even now, all these years later, in Abby's sweet little voice. I never saw Abigail again. I stumbled through the dark for hours trying to find her, growing more and more desperate till I was screaming for her. Always her voice drifted towards me, pulling me deeper into the darkness, until finally, I collapsed exhausted. My body curled up into a fetal position, and I cried and cried, till a restless sleep took me. I woke up to daybreak, the sound of dogs barking through the misty woods. My pajamas soaked, and my skin as cold as ice. Every muscle in my body ached like fire, my stomach growling with a terrible hunger. I stumbled towards the distant voices calling out, and a few minutes later a search party had found me, my dad among them. I tried to tell him. I tried to explain what had happened, but he wouldn't understand. Couldn't. Over and over again, till he was shaking me violent, his face twisted with rage. He asked me the same question over and over. Where is your sister? They never found Abigail, and despite the telling of all I saw, no one believed me. Everyone, even my parents, were convinced I was hiding some terrible truth. You see, I found out later that day that the search party had been looking for us for 3 days by the time they found me. Yet to me, it only seemed like a single night. I couldn't account for the lost time, no matter how much my parents or the police pleaded with me for the truth, resented me for it. Life was never the same after Abigail's disappearance. My parents grew distant. They fought often. Dad sank into a bottle, Mom into whatever man would have her. No one in town would speak to me, let alone make eye contact. Things came to a head 5 years later, when Dad came home to find Mom in their bed with another man. They both took a shotgun to the chest before Dad reloaded and put the barrel in his own mouth and pulled the trigger. He made me watch the whole thing. I was only 15, left alone in the world. I bounced through the system, failing high school miserably. The only thing I cared about was the next high I could buy or steal. I OD'd in 06 and wound up in a Pray for Jesus rehab program. As bullshit as it was, it changed my life. Or rather, she did. Luna. Just two addicts going through the motions. It was just about the sex until she got pregnant. It's hard to explain, but something changed the moment she told me. I felt like I'd been given another chance at a family. We named my daughter Abby after my sister. She's almost 11 now. I enrolled in night school shortly after she was born and worked my way through high school and up to a degree in mechanical engineering. Graduating last fall, Luna's expecting our second child, a boy this time. Life is good for the first time in a long time. We moved back into the old house about 5 years ago. I took Luna's name when we got married, and I've been gone from Cooksburg so long. Folks just think we bought the place, despite the history, despite everything. It'll always be home to me. Plus, properties with murder-suicide backgrounds don't exactly sell well on the market, if you know what I mean. So life's great. Why am I here, right? The thing is, I'm dreaming about Abigail again, my sister Abby, and I'm dreaming about things I don't remember happening. It's been going on the past 4 hours now. Always a little more of the dream reveals itself. Abby's scared, and she's crying in a grove of tall trees. Only the tall trees. And yet they are. They sway as if they're dancing. Tall, terrifying creatures looming into the dark sky, with Abby huddled in the center, over and over again. I hear the song from her sweet little voice, but when I wake up I can't remember it. Only the melody. I have this sensation, and I don't know how to explain it. Like something terrible is coming. It's a feeling that's been growing worse for a while now. It's gotten so bad I'm afraid to sleep at night. I can't help but wonder if she's still out there somewhere, somehow, or if the trees are coming for me too. I'm afraid to go to sleep, or I guess I'm afraid of what'll happen when I do go to sleep. Okay, let me explain this from the beginning and make it easier. For the past few weeks or so, I've been having these really vivid dreams, and I think they're somehow seeping into the waking world and predicting deaths. It sounds stupid, I know. It all started sometime around last month on an extremely rainy day. I mean, the rain was pouring down outside of my small office on the corner of North and Graining Street, and I could remember something about how I would rather be anywhere else than stuck inside my cubicle crunching away numbers. I hadn't managed to get sleep the night before, due to a family emergency with my mother falling down the stairs and spending the night in the ER waiting room. as she waited to get an x-ray, and afterward, a full leg cast. We didn't get seen by a doctor until 6 a.m., let alone get out of there until 9 a.m. It was a long, grueling night for both of us as I dropped her off, got changed, and booked out of there to head to work. My boss is a hard ass coming down on all of us due to some pushed up deadlines, so no, I couldn't call out. I'm sitting in my cubicle staring at my computer screen as I feel my eyelids begin to weigh down and my vision going into that comfortable middle distance of staring into space when I jolt out of it at the sound of my coworker stopping by. Hey, I didn't want to freak you out, but you must have heard about that break-in a few blocks down from the deli store, yeah? No, not really. Busy night. Why, what's up? Oh, I just wanted to tell you to be careful. It's kinda close by you, right? Break-in went wrong, I guess. The lady living there died. My coworker, we'll call him Andrew, said. He looked sheepishly around with an apologetic and slightly nervous look on his face. He was always a worrier about everyone in the office, and I guess when something bad happens, he likes to let his imagination run rampant. Oh shit. Hey, thanks for worrying. I'll keep my doors locked and all. Sorry to kinda rush this conversation, but I gotta get back to work before Diana jumps down my throat. Both of ours, actually. I gave a pointed look at him and motioned my head over to the approaching figure of our boss making her rounds to check on all of us and our progress. Andrew quickly ducked out and headed back to his cubicle, leaving me in peace. I lowered my head as Diana swept by, pretending to be in the middle of a few different sheets of paper before rubbing my eyes as the sound of her faded out. The rest of the day was quite a bore, and the only exciting thing was getting to leave. I shut off my computer and headed out for the day, sure to pocket my badge and grab my keys before leaving. The bus ride home was a quiet one for sure. It was just myself and a group of teens I suspect that were coming home from the bar, or someplace they shouldn't be. I plugged in my headphones and scrolled through my notifications, before finally opening up my news app. There it was, and the headlines was, "Burglary Gone Wrong. Homeowner Found Dead. Mr. Walter Harrington was found stabbed to death by an unknown assailant after trying to confront them. The neighbor was the one to hear the screams and call the cops." I got off at my stop and made it inside my apartment, sure to lock my doors before heading off to bed. I had a really concerning dream. I don't remember a lot of the dreams I have. While others might be able to cite them detail for detail, mine tend to be vague feelings or complete blackouts. I don't dream properly. This night was different. I found myself looking out of a window at a backyard I didn't recognize, closing the curtains and turning away from them. "What were you looking for, Alex?" an unfamiliar voice asked. "I thought I heard something," I replied, surprised by the depth in my voice. It wasn't strange, but seemed like a loose-fitting shoe, a few sizes too big. I could feel something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was a strange feeling of apprehension and skin that was wrapped too tight around the body. I turned towards the older woman sitting on the bed, all cozied up and appearing ready for sleep. I slid in under the covers with her and turned off the bedside lamp, submerging us into the darkness with only the TV to illuminate us. The older woman chatted idly about work and her colleagues for a while, as I nodded and hummed to fill the silence. Eventually, the conversation died down, and when I looked over, she was fast asleep. It felt so odd to be looking at her, almost as if I knew her, but I couldn't place her anywhere. I had no memories, but the person I was in my dream knew her so well. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard a clatter. I slowly moved out of the bed and turned on the light. I'm not a brave person by any sense of the definition, but it was a dream, and what's the worst that could happen? I made my way out of the bedroom and down the hall, stepping softly, trying not to creak the wooden floors. Another clatter. I jumped a bit and stumbled back a bit, loud enough for it to be audible. I could remember my internal monologue going, fuck, or something of the sorts. I had navigated my way to the end of the hall in the one-story building, I assume. I didn't see any stairs, and listened quietly, peeking into the dark kitchen. I felt around for a light switch on the wall but couldn't find any near me. I could barely make out my surroundings, except for whatever was illuminated by the streetlight outside of the window shining in. I listened quietly for any more movement, and began to turn around, ready to head back, when I felt a solid weight slam against me. I fell to the ground, pulling down a chair near me as I grappled with the attacker, trying to pull myself up and away. Help! I tried to scream for the woman. I choked on the rest of my pleas as I felt 2 hands wrapped firmly around my throat. We tossed around for a bit longer before I felt myself getting overpowered and tired, everything growing fuzzier. He stood over me, pressing down further and farther against my trachea before nothing came out for sound. I attempted to pry the hands away, kick, gouge, anything, but before I knew it, I woke up. I had flung myself out of bed, kicking and screaming the covers off of me and frantically swinging at anything close to me. It took me a while to even realize that I was in my own bedroom, safe and alive. A cold sweat had taken over me, and I slowly gathered myself and began to come back to reality, scooting up and slowly untangling myself from the blankets my legs were caught in. I sat there for a minute or so before I began to choke on a few sobs. I cried for a bit and eventually managed to calm myself down from the frantic and emotional state before getting back into bed. I thought nothing of it for a while. The next day, I got up, went to work, and went about my life as ordinary as it was. It was a bad dream, that was all. It wasn't until 4 days after the dream that I was watching the news, curled up on my couch with slightly cold coffee, that a story about another break-in gone wrong. This time, it was a man and his family strangled to death in their own home. The pictures of the victims appeared on the screen, and that's when my stomach dropped. It was the older woman I saw from my nightmare. Her face plastered my television alongside an unrecognizable man's, both in their late 40s. I know it sounds absolutely nuts that a dream I had might have led to this person's death, or well, that my dream predicted their death. Hear me out, this wasn't the only case. I started having these types of dreams on a weekly basis. At the beginning of the week, I'd dream in the eyes of another person, and each one ended the same way: death. Later, the actual deaths would happen. It was always 4 days apart from the dream. I started to track these people, try, in my dreams, to figure out who they were, where they lived, anything to give me a sign of how to contact these people and warn them. Yet, every time I woke up, I couldn't remember any of the information, only their faces. It's been 4 different people, strangled, stabbed, hit by a drunk driver, and heart attack, from what I assume. The last dream is different though, and I'm scared. I don't want to fall asleep anymore, but I'm afraid I already set the next person in motion. 2 nights ago, I had another one of those dreams. At the beginning of this dream, I found myself on a public bus sitting down and staring out of a window. It appeared somewhat early in the morning or late at night. All I know is that the sun wasn't out yet. I'm sitting on the bus waiting for a stop, but I'm not sure which one. Every so often, the bus will rattle and come to a stop, letting a few strangers on and off before it starts back up again. Heading down an endless route, I sat there, uneasy. Something felt different though. In this dream, there was no tight feeling of the skin. The shoe felt right. It felt right to be experiencing this. I felt a buzzing in the back pocket and yanked out the phone and swiped to answer the call. I recognized the phone number. It was Andrew. Hello? I answered. Hey, thanks for saving my ass at the meeting. I seriously owe you one. In fact, how does a drink sound? My treat, of course. Andrew offered, his voice coming through broken. Yeah, sure. That sounds fine. Wait, Andrew. Who are you calling? What do you mean, who? Don't act dumb. Seriously. Anyways, I gotta let you go. See you soon. He hung up. I stared at the black screen in disbelief to see my own reflection on the phone. This was my dream. I'm the one that was going to die. I stood up hurriedly, grabbing onto the hanging trapeze bar above my head and holding on tight. I shoved my phone away before waving my other arm around to get the bus driver's attention. Excuse me? Hey, excuse me. Can we please stop the bus? Stop, please. I need to get off. Stop it right here. Yeah, that's fine. Just let me off. I pleaded. Ma'am, are you alright? Yeah, I'm fine. Just let me off, please. I responded, tears forming at the corner of my eyes. I felt the eyes of the other passengers stare at me wildly, as I had no reason to be panicking. Just another lunatic in the city. The bus driver nodded slowly, looking at me through the rearview mirror in the front of the bus, apprehensive. I let out a relieved sigh and relaxed visibly. He turned his head slightly to talk to me some more, keeping me in the corner of his eye. Give me a second to pull over. And that's when it hit, both metaphorically and physically. I felt the slam of an 18-wheeler curl the metal of the bus inwards, and the smell of burning and screams. I felt the heat and the coldness of the metal press against me. I felt a crushing sensation as the world folded in on me and collapsed. I woke up. I have a feeling that there's no skirting around or avoiding this. That one way or another, my death will happen in the remaining days. Called a hunch. I haven't left my house since that dream, and each hour I grow more and more anxious. The feeling you get when you know something is brewing. I'm going to spend the rest of my time being with ones I love and doing what I love. Yeah, I'm going to avoid buses. Besides, I have 2 more nights at best. I don't want to die, but I don't think I get that choice. The man wearing my face was sitting at the bus stop bench, reading a book. I live in the Midwest United States, in an in-between town. I moved here about 5 years back, which makes me one of the few people to move in, and not out in the last decade. We're pretty small, too small for most chain restaurants. The kind of town where you got your McDonald's and all, but no Applebee's. But we're big enough that you don't really know the people around you so well. The girl at the counter of the coffee place knows my name and my usual order, but not much else. We're too out of the way to be a pit stop town on the way to the nearest city. But the county buses run through because people need to get to work. Was that too much detail about the local food scene? I don't know. I think it's important. I want you to understand. Anyway, I was at the coffee place when I saw him. I work in an auto repair shop a bit out of town, and I'm an insomniac. So on my lunch break, I get a coffee just about every day, so I can make it to the end of my shift. Jake teases me about it. I'm kind of a big, grimy dude, and I get the girliest drinks. Sue me for being a sweet tooth. So I'm standing by the window waiting on my order. At first, I didn't think anything really. Beyond just, oh, that's a new face. But my eyes linger, and I get that prickly sensation all over like my brain twigging me that something's wrong. I only ever felt it so strong a couple times before in my life. Once, when I was out deer hunting with my dad, and we saw a coyote, who we realized in a minute was rabid, come limping up towards us. The other was at trade school, and I saw some guy posted up by my truck, and just knew he was waiting for me. The first thing I could recognize was the haircut, then height, the general shape of his face. He was at a distance and hard to make out, and I might not have even noticed if my subconscious hadn't hooked him. I heard someone say once that you've never seen your own face, just pictures and reflections, but I have seen it, I guess. It was sort of like the first time you see a video of yourself, distorted compared to what you see in the mirror. The barista broke my attention to give me my coffee, and I forgot him for about a minute before I walked out to get to my truck. I was just across the street from him, and I looked at him and those were my eyes. He even dressed like me. Not like he was in the exact same clothes, but the kind of nondescript thing that I'd usually wear. Flannel over denim, work boots. His clothes were cleaner than mine usually looked. By this point, I was full on staring, coffee hot in my hand. And he looked up, made eye contact. He smiled just a bit. He waved awkwardly. His smile went to his eyes, like a really earnest smile that somehow made my stomach seize up. Just like that, he went back to his book. Coming out of this, I was woozy, about to stumble every step back to my truck. I never locked the doors, but I did now. It sounds ridiculous in hindsight, especially typing it, but it's hard to explain how it felt to see him. Practically like I was leaving my own body. My skin was clammy and a little numb. To my credit, as much of a baby as I was, I pushed through the rest of my day like normal, had my coffee, went back for my lunch break. Somebody in town's brakes were wearing thin. Somebody else had junked up their transmission. Ordinary day. The whole time through in the back of my head, I was still there on the sidewalk staring at the guy with my face. I slept worse than usual that night. I've had sleeping problems since I was a kid. Doctors said it was a routine thing. Any big change from my normal day, I can barely get a wink in. When Jake first moved in, I got so ornery from the sleep deprivation that we ended up fighting just about every day, until I started sleeping on the couch. I stayed up that whole night just staring at the computer. I'd gone on some childish Google rabbit hole on doppelgangers, and found nothing that seemed helpful, and at some point, I stopped reading and my eyes just glazed over, and it was morning. First half of my shift was hell, until I hit my second wind. I went to the coffee shop, and the dizziness started to set in on the drive over. I know I should blame the fact that I was running on empty, but I still can't help thinking maybe it was because of him. He was there in the same spot when I pulled up. I wouldn't look directly at him, just rushed through to get into the store. Even about 10 yards off, he was like a physical presence. Like he might as well have been right up in my ear. I could feel his breaths, slow and even, puffing on the back of my neck. I shook the entire time I was getting my drink. Coffee girl seemed a bit nervy too. She dropped my change on the counter and didn't even smile at me, which just made me more unsettled. She was normally really perky, even if it was just fake customer service crap. Missing it made the atmosphere all that much more alien. When things get bad, I'm the kind of guy who just fades out into his own head. It's a skill, like a bad one obviously, but a well-practiced one. I let myself recede back into my skull, waiting for my drink. Thought about the work I had to get done at the shop. Sleep deprivation made zoning out even easier. Up until I left the shop, that is. I didn't even look at him. Maybe it was because I was moving on autopilot and so deep in my nothing place, but I was absolutely punched with sensation as I got up to the outdoor bistro seating. The feeling of paper against my fingertips as I turned a page, a foggy half image of black text on creamy white. My full body rocked to a stop and caught myself. Coffee spilled in my hand. It was boiling hot and I could barely feel it. There he was, reading a book without a care in the world, smiling with my mouth. He had a shadow of stubble. I hadn't shaved the night before. My first thought was that it felt like he'd try to rip the soul out of my body. I couldn't move away. I had to know what was wrong with him, or wrong with me. I sat down and didn't take a sip of my coffee, just stared. He didn't feel me looking at him today, or he pretended not to, but at least when I watched him, I didn't get any more of whatever that had been. The longer I looked, it was weird. I thought I could see things around him, but not really see them. It was this subtle haze like heat shimmer all around him, and as I looked, I could almost see it forming this membrane stretching out in every direction. This clear web, a thick tendril of it stretched between me and him, almost present and iridescent, and real the harder I stared. If I had the balls, I could have reached out and touched it. After a little while, I realized that other people were starting to notice him. They'd stop, double take, then stand there gawking at him. It seemed weird at first, until I realized, of course they'd be freaked out. I was sitting right there, across the street. I mean, you'd be startled to see two of your neighbor one day, right? Even comforting myself that way didn't seem quite right. Like, they didn't know me that well. I could have had a twin or something, but when he lifted his head up out of his book and smiled at them, gave a little wave to whoever he'd caught staring, they'd act like he punched them. From an outsider's perspective, it was somehow, I don't know, embarrassing. I must have looked that dumb yesterday. He sat there for almost an hour with his book, and then the bus came. I could see him pay with change, laugh a bit at something the bus driver said, and then he escaped. Down the road and towards civilization. I went and threw up in a garbage can, and had broken out in a cold sweat, so I called into work and said I thought I had food poisoning. I got chewed out for taking off, but like, what were they going to do? Bring me in? Have me puke on people's cars? My boss can be such a dick. I texted Jake on the way home and crawled into bed. He waited for me to wake up on my own, even after he got to the house. And he brought a big thing of baked mac and cheese into bed with him for us to share. Homemade. Not that Velveeta crap. God, I loved him so much. And he asked, "You feeling better now, Ringo?" My parents named me Harrison, after the Beatle. He calls me Ringo when he thinks he's being cute. I told him yeah, I was. He teased me for staying up all night, online reading scary stories or whatever. I said I stay up all night all the time, and never threw up over it. Well, that's because I must be getting old. My elderly body wasn't taking kindly to how I treat it no more. I pinched him on the arm. We chatted about other things, God knows what. He can talk for hours without me having to say a word. It's nice. I'm pretty much quiet by nature, and so was my dad. It's nice having someone who can make you laugh and feel like a human being, but he said something after we'd flicked on the news that made me sick all over again. Oh, and I heard the craziest thing from Susie today when she came into the office. I only just barely heard her the first time. She was up at the nurse's station, you know, and I'm trying to read some kid's chart. And I nearly put it down and went over and asked her if she needed to go to a hospital or a psych ward. But I asked nicely later, and she said, "Baby, Guess what she said? I was half paying attention at this point, splitting my ears between him and tomorrow's weather report. She's pregnant? He threw his head back and laughed. That'd be harder to believe than what she actually said, now that you mention. But she was like, adamant that some woman was trying to steal her soul. Cold rushed over me and I muted the weather. She what? Yeah, I didn't think she was a religious or anything, but... No. He stopped and looked at me all bright and concerned. What did she say? Harry, you okay? You've been acting funny all day. Jacob, please. He sighed, kind of frustrated now. I don't know. She just said, when she was in town yesterday before her shift, she passed by this woman who tried to rip the soul out of her body. I don't know what it means. It's just Susie being a crackhead. I squeezed the remote and almost broke the damn thing. There were more of them. More doppelganger things. Maybe they were feeling the town out slowly, resident by resident, until they found what they needed. She's not crazy. I know what she means. He squinted at me. This was getting him more agitated. Well, what does that mean? It dawned on me that I couldn't possibly explain what I'd been seeing without sounding like an insane person to my licensed medical professional spouse. I made a half-assed attempt, mostly vague and avoidant, before I asked him if he'd let me drive him into town before work. He agreed, probably because he was planning on talking me into seeing the clinic, and maybe he wanted to get a coffee, I don't know. So I brought him there, and the stranger was there, familiar as ever, in his same old spot. The moment I laid eyes on him, face buried in his book, I could feel him dig into me. Jake stiffened up like a corpse by my side. His hand tried to grab from me, but I was already out the door, and making a beeline for the man with my face. I barely even waited for traffic. I was so hopped up on being right, on being proven, on knowing I wasn't going crazy. At that point, even all evidence to the contrary, I was half sure that Jake wouldn't see him at all. Closer I got to the guy, shoulders up and tight. The stronger the pull was, I put everything I had into staying clear-headed and ignoring the ghost images of words on paper. I almost got hit by a car for my troubles. People were already staring at him, but as I approached, some of their eyes turned onto me too. I could feel them, like claws and arrows, like the way he pulled at me. I stopped a few feet away and squared my shoulders. Hey. He sat up and looked straight at me. The air around him shimmered. It was that web, all leading back to him like some kind of spider. For a second I could see the cord between me and him, and it was as thick as my wrist, twice what it was yesterday. Harry, right? I asked, looking down at me. He smiled and shook his head. No, son. I think you got me mixed up with someone else. He pointed at the book in my hands. My knuckles had gone white, gripping so tight onto it. Can I see that for a minute? Before I could nod, it was his book. Or shake my head. Hadn't I been in the middle of reading it? My hands were empty. One by my side, the other aimed down in a casual point to the book in the stranger's lap. The next thing I noticed is the air had been pulled right out of my lungs. Breathing in was like breathing fire for that first second, and I grabbed my chest. Before I caught my breath, rocked with dizziness and pain in my chest, I would have sworn I was having a heart attack. The hell? You ought to be more careful, Harrison. You could get really hurt pulling a stunt like that. He sounded sincere. It was the sickest part of it to me at the time. I was so angry I was shaking with it. Sure, I would swing on him in any moment. Don't you dare give me that. He sighed. The whole time. He never got angry or raised his voice. Well, hey, don't shoot the messenger. You're the one going around looking into things that ain't your business, aren't you? Not my business. You come into my town, where I live, and you tell me it's not my business? And I haven't done anything. Whose face are you wearing then? He reached up and touched my face. His own face. At the edge of our stubble. I don't want any trouble. Well, tell your friend. I don't have friends, Harrison. Not in this town, leastways. He gave me a long blink and looked me up and down. My skin crawled like a ripple tracking with movement of his gaze. He smiled. I'm just passing through, he said with my voice. Don't pay me any mind. What the hell do you... I just try not to think about it. You can't go through your life trying to understand everything that happens to you. His smile all of a sudden got really sad. I felt the ache in it. I remember the times I'd smiled like that. I couldn't think of anything to say to him. And he could tell I was struggling because he lifted his book up like he wanted me to leave him to it. Crime and punishment. I pressed my hand on my chest, where the tightness was turning into a proper knot. I'll be gone after tomorrow, he assured me, turning his eyes down to the page. I should have told him to get out of town today if he knew it was good for him. Hell, I should have chased him out myself, but I just ripped myself away. The more I walked, I could feel the hooks under my skin pop off and disappear, and the tight feeling starting to fade. I got into the car and turned to Jake. Tears were pouring down his face. His hands were clasped over his mouth to catch the sobs, but I'd never seen him cry like that. I started fussing instantly, but he was crying too hard to speak. I asked if he needed to take off the rest of the day, and he nodded. We could pretend he'd picked up a stomach bug from me yesterday. He cried for hours, just uncontrollable. To this day, he won't tell me exactly what happened to him while I was talking to the stranger. I kind of have an idea. I don't like to think about it. The one thing he did tell me was that the man had his face. That's when I knew. I went back the next day as early as I could, and sure enough the man with our faces was there. The air was thick like the humidity just before a big storm. He didn't seem to notice, and the people whose routines he had disrupted were stock still, staring at him. And I wanted more than anything to shout for him to get out of there. Didn't he know this was dangerous? And didn't he care about... But anyway, I couldn't get my voice up over the thick silence sliding down my throat. I wasn't the only one. Nobody was willing to make the first move. Then Jeff, the old man who runs the liquor store, came up behind the stranger with the driver he keeps behind the counter for security. He sat up a little. He knew the old man was behind him, and he didn't even turn around. The metal bulb smacked against his shoulder and keeled him over right off the bench. I rolled with the blow. His book fell, and I never saw it again after, because in that moment, everything turned into chaos. A little under a dozen people rushed for him. I'm not oversensitive or hysterical or whatever. I swear on God that I could feel everything. I haven't asked anybody else if they felt it too. Steel-toed boots to the gut, dirt and asphalt, and nice folks hate in your mouth. I don't know if it's worse if they couldn't or could. It was the kind of stuff you only see in the real gritty nature docs, or when you spend a long time sitting still in a deer stand, when all the birds descend on one among them and rips its throat out, or a mama fox bashes her kit to death. It's not malicious, it's a survival instinct, but it's never believed for a second that natural doesn't mean it can't be evil. And he looked up, made eye contact. His eyes were so big and bloodshot and scared. I could feel him pleading inside my head so loud, and I could feel the bruising and breaking like a phantom sensation under my skin. I just stood there. Somebody brought their foot down on the center of his face, and it made this horrible cracking sound. And that was when I finally looked away. That was when I stopped feeling it. There were a few more moments of scuffling before everyone stopped. He'd quit moving, and I think it made everyone realize all of a sudden what they were doing and where. After a while, someone got a big sheet and draped him in it, staining it red everywhere. I don't know what they did with him after they wrapped him up and moved him. The coffee shop owner got the hose he used for the flower boxes in his windows and sprayed down the street until the gore was washed away. I watched my neighbors murder me. I haven't disguised myself before posting this. I could have spared the personal details and changed people's names. It'd be very consistent for a cowardly like me, but I think the least I can do for us both, me and him, is just be honest. I'm scared as hell every day. I never stopped thinking about the way his bones cracked and his teeth came out and his skin sloughed away like they'd beaten it to mashed potato. If you read this, if you're from my town, you know who I am, and I know who you are, and I think you deserve to be a little scared too. Yesterday, for just a minute, I thought I saw my boss flinch looking at me. He had this look of horror and rage, and when it happened, I knew him inside out. I saw myself, and I looked like him. Maybe sometimes, if you're that scared of seeing your reflection, that's your own fault. Hey, so I don't really know where else to put this. I've never written on here before, mainly because I thought this was all fake. It seemed like people here like to tell stories about paranormal activities they encounter, and most people buy into it and play along. However, now I'm not so sure. So a few days ago, I moved into my new house in the middle of a really nice area. Well, okay. It's not so much a house as much as it is a small wooden building that I can live in. But this area was really nice. The likelihood of my house getting broken into was less than 0%. The neighbors were so far away from my house, I wouldn't have to worry about them ever waking me up. The rent was the best part. Non-existent. That's right. I lived in the middle of the woods now. I was tired of always being in the city where it felt like everyone always had to know what everyone else was doing. Facebook updates, Twitter, Instagram, and all this social media nonsense. I remember when the hardest part of my day was learning how to code so that my MySpace page looked pretty cool, and who my top friends were going to be that week. If you don't know what I'm talking about, well, I don't really have time to explain, so you are going to have to do some research on your own. Now, back to what I was talking about. I just moved into the shack in the woods. I had built it myself. It was small, with just a living room that doubled as a kitchen. I had what you could call a bathroom, and of course a bedroom. Now, before you ask, yeah, I had electricity. There were still TV shows I wanted to watch, okay? Besides, I didn't want a gas stove in my small shack because that was just asking for trouble, and I still needed a way to cook dinners and such. Speaking of, I had killed a deer earlier in the week before I had moved in. Since I was little, my family had taken me hunting. I remember I was about 7 when I was finally allowed to shoot a deer. Luckily for the deer, I sucked and missed by about a mile. Since then, I've grown much better at hunting, and now I planned on using all the skills from that to live off the land. Now I still make trips to the store for basic things I can't make off the land, like Coke, milk, eggs and such. Now to get back on track. I just sat down and was getting ready to turn on my TV and eat my dinner when I heard a knock at the door, which was actually kind of strange. It was late. I am after all a night owl. It was also a Monday, so people shouldn't be getting ready to go to bed for work in the morning. Plus, I was easily about 3 miles out of the way from any passerby. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but right now, the only way to my house is up a dirt hill that is only accessible by truck. So I stood up, making sure to place my food out of reach for any scurrying insects that might make their way into the shack, and walked to the door. When I went to grab the door handle, my hand suddenly just stopped moving, and that's when it hit me. You know that feeling of dread you get when you're about to do something really stupid or scary, and your whole body tells you that you shouldn't do it, as it'll probably lead to your death, or to you getting severely hurt? It's almost like a sixth sense. No one can ever explain it, or why it happens. But it's always just there. I shook off the feeling and opened the door, and there standing before me, I was absolutely terrified of, was absolutely nothing. My porch was empty. Thanks, Sixth Sense. You let me down. Now I was starting out into the woods, thinking to myself, great. I moved to the middle of fricking nowhere, and kids are still able to ding-dong ditch me. I shook my head before looking around again. There was no sound of any kind of vehicle driving away from my property. Something I'd certainly hear, as there was no other highway near me. Also, I noticed that there wasn't even a car around the house. I have some floodlights attached to the outside as a just-in-case kind of thing. Then, I heard it. Something I never planned on hearing while in my home. The sound of the rocking chair squeaking back and forth with no one in it. This sent shivers down my spine. I felt a bead of sweat go down my forehead as I quickly turned around, pulling out a hunting knife I always keep handy. And there, standing in the middle of my house, were some women I had never met before. I looked at the 3 of them, studying each one with interest, as they stood in a perfect line next to each other. The one on the left wore a torn-up red dress, but seemed to be the most normal out of the 3. Her skin was pale. Not super pale, but like, more pale than a human skin should be. Her smile, while beautiful, seemed a bit off. It caused my entire body to shiver, even though the heater was on. The one on the right wore an all-white dress that flowed down way past her heels. It wasn't a wedding dress necessarily, but if it wasn't, it was pretty close. She wore a veil over her head to cover her face, but I could still see her piercing red eyes through it. Her breathing was like that of an animal that's getting ready to charge you in order to get you away from its home. She also was pretty short. Maybe she was a child. And finally, the 3rd one was in the center. She looked much older than the other 2, and sat in my rocking chair in the center. She rocked back and forth in a very rhythmic pattern. It was almost like she was trying to bring me into some kind of trance. I found myself rocking a bit in pattern with the chair. I actually lost a bit of time when this happened. When I finally noticed this, I shook it off like it had been hours since they arrived. Upon looking down at my watch, I noticed it had only been a few minutes. I looked up at them and began staring at them for a minute, trying to muster up any kind of words that I could possibly say to them, since it was clear that they were not going to talk to me. So, I don't have a rocking chair? Is all I could muster up. Pathetic, but like, could you imagine a world where 3 uninvited guests just show up out of nowhere and are just in your house with a rocking chair you didn't own? Like, how did she even get it past me? I don't have a back door, so they couldn't enter that way. And my singular window was way too small for anyone to fit through. The only entrance that I was aware of was my front door. I scratched the back of my head as they continued to stare at me, never uttering a single word. Alright, well if you could just leave, I would really like to eat my dinner now before it gets cold. I moved to the side and ushered them towards the door, to once again ask them to leave. And unsurprisingly, they didn't leave, but just kept staring at me. I really didn't know what to think, or really what to do. What does one do in this situation? I shrugged it off and walked back towards my chair ready to eat my dinner. There were 3 women, one of which was old. She probably could barely walk. One was so young I was pretty sure I could just stick my hand out and stop her from getting to me. The last one, the one who just kept smiling at me, wasn't all that threatening either, and all I wanted to do was eat my food. I put my knife away and walked over to my plate, and began eating, never taking my eyes off them. When I finally finished, they decided to finally speak to me. We were interested in meeting our new neighbor. I hope our pets don't cause any trouble for you during your stay here. Well, at least they let me finish eating before talking to me. That was polite, even if they broke into my house somehow. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone... But she cut me off before I could finish speaking, and with a very stern voice. Of course, we live here. These woods are our woods after all. I stared at her blankly for a moment, confused as all get out. I had chosen to live here because I have always hunted here, and never have I seen another face here, let alone some other living establishment. We'll be leaving now, Mr. Hogfers. And with that, they left. I'm a little lost on who or what they are. Can anyone help me out, or give me some information?